contentious topic these days, South. I don't know whether you call it South versus North, but the South divide, especially after your book. I would start with I would rather not start with the data of, 30 to 31% increase in GDP, UP 9%, etc. I mean, I would rather go into a larger context, a larger civilizational or cultural context or historical context into the South, not versus, the South different from the North. So where do you see the South standing today? As an independent cultural force, as an independent economic force, which is helping the rest of the country? Or do you see the South as part of a unified cultural economic force, which is enriching the country's economy? I don't know what, culture.
So, thank you for that, and thank you for having me. It's very important that we distinguish the ideas of culture, and our individual ideas of it from the political economy, right? In my mind, culture is a post facto understanding of, who we are and what our definition of an in-group is, right? The purpose of an in-group is not to contribute to the economy of what is the political boundary of India. The purpose of an in-group is to be the in-group, right? And towards that extent, if you were to, which is why the contribution of GDP, again, GDP is a number which, in fact, it's the person who came up with GDP has quite often warned us that, it's most likely to be abused, Simon Kuznets, right? But the point I want to make here is pretty simple. The status of various states in India is deeply problematic, whether they are south or west or east. But the point is that the Indian Union is at a certain precipice. And the reason why it is the case is because the resource allocation problems of this country have come to a pass wherein the viability of arriving at reasonable solutions no longer seems to be within the realm of what is conventional ideas of understanding of governance, right? So that is a serious problem. Where does culture come in? Well, like people who are at the receiving end are going to define themselves by a certain culture, and therefore, like how do I say this? I guess I'll leave culture to, anthropologists and historians, but to me, the intractability of the resource allocation problem is what matters.
But I mean, if you look at it, I'm tossing it to you. I mean, there's a very strong Southern identity. I mean, there is in terms of clothes, in terms of food, in terms of even cinema. But while you can actually divide the Northern identities into more specific, the rest of the subcontinent, let's put it that way. So would you see the South as a separate cultural entity ever coming into conflict with the Northern structures? Unless it already has, economically.
Like all historians, historians cannot give you short answers. Historians cannot give short answers. They have to take hours and hours, but considering the limitations of time, we are always constrained by time. I think no region exists in isolation. This is a no-brainer. But each region, each culture has its own special characteristics, defined by, time and the various groups which have contributed to it. So we can think in terms of commonalities, but we can also think in terms of diversities. So I think there are times when we have to think of what distinguishes the South from the North, considering what has happened in the last, say, 30, 40 years, economically, in the sphere of economics, in terms of growth, in terms of politics. I think separate processes have unfolded. How economic growth in South India, as my colleagues Kalai Arasan and Vijay Bhaskar have argued, I think in their book, Dravidian Model, that growth has been possible to a great extent in South India because of the inclusive nature of that. So here I also want to bring in one historical thing, There is always the baggage of weight, baggage of culture and history. So more than 100 years ago, when V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, Vausi, started the shipping navigation company, there was no capitalist enterprise in this part of the country, certainly down south. But how does somebody come up with an idea to have a grand idea of starting a shipping company? You can always, culture is made by human beings, which means that though they are constrained, they can always transcend that.
No, but then why this whole language conflict between Hindi and Southern language? I mean, if it's so inclusive, why this? Is it a political thing or is it a cultural thing?
Okay. So historically, we have to go back quite far in time. So whether we go back to the legacy of the Sangam literature, where, almost all over the world, literature and culture is very strongly rooted in religion. What we find in Tamil, actually, is there is strongly rooted in a secular culture, one. But that is the same place which also gives birth to the Bhakti movement. South India is the birthplace of the Bhakti movement, which has had such a transformational effect on our society that it continues today. 1,500 years later, you can still see the influence of the Bhakti movement in terms of how liberating it can be. We find this the difference between how Hinduism practiced in North India and how it is practiced in South India.
But you had that in the Bengal Renaissance, period in the East, I mean, which you didn't have as the northern, part of it. But I agree with you to a certain extent. Now, I'm going to venture into slightly dangerous territory. 1947 to 50 was a very turbulent period because the nation was being put together, etc., etc. So if you remember Dr. C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who was the Diwan of Travancore, he was actually envisaging two separate countries in many ways, like a loose federation where he had made an arrangement with the Nizam, so the Madras Presidency, the Travancore state, etc., etc., would be part of a federation which is different from the rest of the country. And presumably with Sir C.P. as the Prime Minister, I suppose. To the extent that I remember Nehru, the story about Nehru was so enraged and hated him so much that he told Patel that if he comes anywhere near Delhi, I'm going to shoot him. And where is he now? So Patel said, he's in my house right now. So, that was a different era. But what do you think? I mean, surely going into dangerous territory, surely going into a kind of, hypothetical situation. If that had happened, economically, how different would have been the picture?
So before we come to the economics, I think you're right in that consider, Hyderabad, for instance, right? Like the Indian Union never asked its people whether, what were the different provinces of British India, to ask them whether do you want to be part of the union in any formal referenda, even in cases where it was absolutely clear that the population was for joining the Indian Union. Take, Hyderabad, for instance. Like, the Indian troops marched in, they sort of won it over, but the reasonable thing to do would be to ask them, hey, don't you want to come? Especially given that the union at that time knew quite well that the answer would be yes. So the lack of the idea of the consent of the governed does not seem to be in the DNA of the Indian Union since its inception. And that is probably what is causing many of these concerns. To answer your question as to why is it that there is this problem of language earlier, like, all you need to do is, go to Finland, and their hatred for the Swedes to this day is actually very, very, there is still a law on the books in Finland, for instance, in that if you're stopped by a policeman, you can either, whatever, the charges have to be read out either in Swedish or in Finnish based on what you want, and most people who are drunk and get caught pretend that they're Swedish and ask that to be read out in, Swedish, right? But therein lies the problem. The reason why problematic is because the moment you have a kind of an imposition, either from the Swedes to the Finns or from Delhi here, people are not against the language. People are against the idea of imposition. And whatever that imposition is, the opposite of that becomes your in-group, right? And that definition, unless you ask in a formal way, and unless there is a written ask of it, and that consent is periodically renewed, it becomes problematic. And to answer your question of C.P. Ramaswamy, forget his full name. Anyway, C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer. Yes. Iyer, right? Yes. Yeah, the road on which I go away. But the point is that, the more reasonable question is not whether we want an independent Southern India or whether he wanted it, but the more reasonable question is, Tamil Nadu today is the size of Germany, right? Most Indian states are bigger than most European countries, right? You would not ask if, Germany wants to, should be a country, right? Like so, but 1.4 billion people is a lot of people. So it's reasonable to wonder, why is this such a large country? And if it is such a large country for good reasons, which maybe it is, then the reasonable thing to do that from that point forward would be to renew the consent on a periodic basis. That is a mechanism that we don't have.
All right, so we're talking about
If I may just add a little bit about, tidbit about C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer.
I think we need to
C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who
take it slightly, slightly lower. Too close to the mic.
Okay. So C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, who wanted to declare Travancore as an independent state, in 20 years' time he was made chairperson of the National Integration Council, and C.N. Annadurai ridiculed Nehru for it. So the question of consent, it is any nation is based on, a voluntary consent. We find, now the great book that Arup Jyoti Saikya has written about Assam. What I find is that in the margins of the country and the nation, the kind of football that politicians play with people, where their consent is assumed rather than debated. I think that is the crucial point. It is not a question of, somebody want to be going away, but it is always constantly renegotiating your relationship with other parts of the great nation.
You've been a more civilized discourse. Okay, let me lob another question at you. See, India is rather is what I call the antiquity victimhood. The antiquity of victimhood. Oh, we were kind of, we were civilization, we were like 500,000 years old, and these guys came in and blah, blah, blah. The South has suffered horrible invasions. We had a lot of Islamic invaders. We had, Tipu all the way up till Palghar and, etc. Why is it that religion is a more effective political tool in the North than in the South?
Okay, I'll take this. I think once again we have to go to the Bhakti movement. When it originates in Tamil Nadu, South India, in the 6th or 7th centuries, it is a profoundly liberating movement. It is able to mobilize all classes of people. And it uses not a ritualistic language which people can't understand, but the language of the people. And if you look at all the devotional literature, whether it is of the Saivite Nayanmars or the Vaishnavite Alvars, you find there is a emphasis on the direct relationship with God, rather than through the mediation of a priestly class or through the mediation of a language that people can't understand. So that is foundational, and that continues to feed the culture, and that continues to inform the culture of the people. The second is what happens to the institution of the temple during the Chola period. Unlike the North, in South India, temple is a social institution. Even though the society is hierarchical, caste is very much there, every segment of society has a role in the temple institution, even though it may not be equal. So that has a very leveling role. And the power that is given to the Tamil language.
No, but you still have Dalit temples and non-Dalit temples. You had in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu now. So how does that work?
Pardon me?
I said you have lower caste temples. I mean, you keep reading about, like roads passing through. So lower caste temples, you have the same thing in Kerala, you have the same thing in Tamil Nadu, you have the same thing in... So temple participation, leveling experience cannot be a universal. No? There is a caste element to it also.
No. Temple as a social institution in Tamil Nadu is of a very different order. It is a social institution institution, cultural institution, economic institution, and it has been so for at least 800 or 900 years. That is why we find that to this day, we find social conflicts played out in terms of rites in temples. We want to pull
Muslims in Kerala have done the same. I don't know about the rest. Yeah, let me continue.
Just to add to what he says, while that might be true about the historical evolution of this society, if you were to look at states wherein Prerna Singh wrote a wonderful book on this, and she measures the degree of subnationalism in every state. And if you basically correlate that degree of subnationalism to the use of religion in that particular state's politics, you find that the states with the highest subnationalism have the lowest use of religion in their politics. And coincidentally, Tamil Nadu and Kerala happen to have the highest degrees of subnationalism, and incidentally, their use of religion in their politics is much lower. So.
Yeah, let's switch to a more contemporary kind of a thing, because I'm talking about the film industry, right? The great stars were always from Raj Kapoor to Shah Rukh is still, he's done something amazing recently. But suddenly, the South seemed to have just rocked, people in the North are really like taken aback. It's like they hit them. Who's RRI? Who's Prabhas? Who's this thing? And they're kind of commanding the kind of fees which very few North Indians, which a few North Indian stars kind of do. And there seems to be no heroes come up. While South seems to be manufacturing one after the other, and to the extent that many of the Hollywood guys are turning to Southern, movie plots to kind of repeat this. So do you think the South as a modern cultural force is ever going to take over the North or leave the North behind?
I think the nature of the film industry is very, very different in the North and the South. Bollywood, because it wants to cater to a very huge market, what it does is, it is kind of a rootless wonder. After the times of Raj Kapoor and Gurudutt or whatever, what we find, at least my little exposure to Hindi cinema, is that in the last 30, 40 years, most of the stories are, they are made in New York and London. While the films of South India, most of them are rooted films. You can make those films only in that region. So that linguistic boundedness, which limits its market, is also its strength. Now you are trying to break it through these pan-Indian films, and the same problem comes up.
See, there's an image percolation, okay? People wanted to dress like Shah Rukh Khan. Remember, they used to be Devanand, sadhana haircut kind of a thing. So in many ways, Bollywood influenced the Indian look all across. Maybe a little bit in the North, there was South, there was separate. So in the 70s or even the early 80s, the whole concept, I live in North India, so the whole concept of the South Indian was a Madrasi who would wear a dhoti, eat sambar, chawal, I don't know, whatever, right? So suddenly, you're having these muscular 6-foot guys, like hitting elephants, and they become like, I remember Devika Padukone, who was supposed to be one of the most beautiful women in India, saying that, I'd love to have an affair with, who was it, Prabhas, was it? All right, it would have been unimaginable 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, where you would have Sridevi, Sridevi was South Indian. Tell me something, hey mama, she's again a South Indian. Huh? Who is? I can't hear.
Deepika Padukone is from...
Oh, yeah, but she's kind of incorporated by the North. That's geographically technical, but what I'm saying is that it would be unimaginable. So the whole South Indian look has changed in the perception of the North. All right, so that is a very strong, let's say, anthropological indicator to the growth of society, how, a body looks. So isn't that a kind of power statement the South is making today?
Shall I take this?
Yeah. Both
okay. Firstly, let me just draw attention to what the great columnist Mukul Kesavan said about the ugly Indian male. In the Indian cinema, men are insufferable, you cannot look at them, while the actresses are ravishing beauties. So that is one part of it. But what I would say is the big difference is the social composition of South Indian cultural elites has changed. From in the last 40 or 50 years, even 30, 35 years ago when I first went to Delhi, a typical South Indian, Tamil Nadu person would always be mistaken for a Brahmin, especially if you could speak a smattering of English. All our newspapers used to quote only Cho Ramaswamy and Gyani and others. But now what has happened in the last 20, 25 years? There has been this widening of the South Indian intellectual elite and cultural elites. That, I think, is reflected in the cinema. You have, Gemini Ganesan, whom we used to ridicule as Sambar. Those kind of soft heroes can't click. Your Arvind Samis cannot become big heroes. It is only Dhanushas and, Vijays and others who don't have conventional good looks. They are the ones who are...
and also the sophistication of South Indian businessmen. I mean, Aziz Premji will be, many of those people. Sorry.
Yeah, I just, I'm very wary of making cultural statements because A, I'm not qualified, and B, I also think that
Please
it
go
comes
ahead.
with a lot of
The
prejudice.
less qualified you are, the more qualified to make a statement.
But I just want to make this point, right? And this abuts Dr. Venkatachalapathy's point, which is that Tamil Nadu's gross enrollment ratio in higher education has been above 50% for a decade now, and it sort of has been in that category now for almost a generation, right? Now, if you have a large number of people who are college educated and go on to hold some version of a relatively high-end service job, that is the making of a middle class, and middle class makes culture, and culture in the end ends up in movies. So it is no surprise that this is a phenomenon. But to the point of the person in Gurgaon, which is sometimes where I live, sort of looking at a little bit of a surprise with movies in southern India, I don't know, that is a comment on them. I don't think it's a comment on us.
Okay. So, do you think the North is this? See, the thing is that, like, look at the way the South has welcomed the salwar kameez. Maybe it's convenient, maybe it's more trendy. Look at the way the South has welcomed even things like paneer. I mean, you go to a restaurant, order butter paneer, and even in the smallest places. Seriously, believe me. The way the South has incorporated even Punjabi music with the dance too, which is I love Punjabi music. I think it's fantastic. So, but. Once again,
I'm very curious. Where are you hanging out?
Where am I hanging out? I mean, not with you, obviously. Not with you, obviously. But if you go to Kerala, you can easily, you get butter paneer quite easily. In fact, my sister-in-law said, when I went home, she said, can I make you some paneer? I said, forget it, no way. So we have welcomed or absorbed these things, all right? I mean, I remember Daler Mehndi being blaring from some tea shop once, But the fact of the matter is that there is not that kind of inclusivity which comes when you start going up. So do you think the South is more open maybe because of education, maybe because of more self-confidence in their own culture, which has grown?
Can I just yes. Much as I would like to sort of, put this chauvinist hat and say yes to this question, the answer is we don't know because there isn't research. And I'm very sort of cautious to say that, any one part of society is more or less welcoming unless we have data to prove it.
But if you drive through Kerala, at any garment shop, you'll see salwar kameezes. I have nothing against them, but which was not the case when I was growing up. No, I'm not saying it's the wrong thing. All I'm saying is that Kerala is more, or maybe the South is more inclusive. They're more open to kind of, absorbing other experiences. That's all I'm saying.
It requires a survey and a book is all I'm saying.
Okay, since I don't use numbers and I use qualitative data, I would broadly agree with it, but there is a geographical reason for it. South India is a peninsular region. We have the coast, and historically coasts are very porous. So we have been open to various influences. We have been open to Arab traders, Roman traders, German, Greek traders. Moors have been here, Portuguese have been here, Dutch have been here. So
we
there
African
has been
kings.
more openness. While in the north, because it is a large hinterland, and the major empires of North India, even the great Mughal Empire, was not a naval empire. While South India, because of its long coastline, has been a naval empire. Maritime, seafaring has been very, very prominent. And I think that explains
Okay,
to a great extent.
one last topic. One last topic is, the South India had the greatest Hindu empires, much before those, the Gupta Empire. I mean, you had the Chola Empire, you had kind of empires which went all the way up to Indonesia and Bali and all that, which actually spread Hinduism, and they're not kind of. But those roles have really been played down until that movie, what is the new movie which has come out, I don't know, something about Chola, whichever you will help me there. There was a new movie which has come on the South Indian king. I mean, there was Ponniyin Selvan, yeah. Right, until then, I mean, the Chera Empire or the Pandya Empire, Chola, please go laughing, was not kind of, so the most of the empires which were considered the Hindu empires, the greatest empires were the Guptas, who the other guys? The Maurya Empire, etc., etc. Why? So, I mean, why is it a historical anomaly in terms of projection?
Okay, the indifference and apathy of North Indian elite towards South India is, it's intolerable, uncondonable. I have lived in Delhi. I have interacted with the North Indian intellectuals. Their knowledge of South Indian culture, language and history hovers around a statistical zero. So they are to blame, we are not to blame.
There you go.
Right. Again, I just want to also say that, I don't think, these empires happen to be Hindu. I don't think that the reason why they aren't in the popular discourse, and for instance, the CBSE textbook in any great detail, at least at the time that I was a student, is not because, they were Hindu. It is largely probably because, the Chola Empire's heyday was like, 1,200 years ago? And, the Mughal empires were more recent, and probably because there is more historical sources available. It's lazy historians to blame.
No, not Hindu in the sense you understand Hindu today. That's not what I mean. I don't mean Hindu as you understand Hindu today.
Whatever the case,
I'm
right? Like
talking
there is a recency bias in the way in which education and history happens, and that is true for all of the world.
Fair enough. But one thing which
If
really...
I may add just one point
Yes,
to your
please.
question. This kind of, binaries which we are operating with Hindu and Muslim, we have to remember that the so-called Hindu empire of Vijayanagara had Muslim soldiers. Its king wore the robes of a sultan. So this idea of, this black and white definitions in terms of religion did not operate in medieval India.
But it did operate during Ashoka, when he had to kind of, work the Brahmins against the Buddhists. I mean, where you look at... Anyway, that's a totally different story. But, so, is it the failure of a political leadership? Because we had very strong political leaders. When you had Kamaraj, you had presidents who were Hindus, South Indians. You had Tamil Nadu chief ministers who controlled who would be the cabinets and stuff like that. So, do you think it is a political failure on part of South Indian politicians?
Absolutely not. It is a failure of the structure of the Indian Union. You can basically win the Indo-Gangetic Plains and form the government in Delhi and completely ignore southern India. And therefore, you get to sort of, live in your own world in Delhi, right?
All right. Any questions from the audience? Nobody wants to ask them questions? Okay. There's a lady at the back.
Is it audible?
Yep.
I'm Abhirami from MOP. My question is to Mr. Nilakantan. So I did a little research and I found that you were a data scientist. So how do you go from being an engineer / data scientist to writing a book called South versus North, India's Great Divide? Like, what drove you to that?
I mean, it would be extraordinarily rude to my co-panelists for me to answer that question on some personal tangent. But if you really want to know, what I did was, I was living in Madras at that time. It was 2011. There was an assembly election. I calculated the probability of my vote impacting, in electing my MLA. My constituency is Virugambakam. If you're really interested, you should go and calculate the probability of that yourself. And, when I calculated that, I found that to be e to the power minus minus 254, if I'm not wrong. And then what happened was that I got curious, and therefore I calculated the probability of me electing the MP, and that happened to be e to the power minus 591, if I'm not wrong. And then what happened was I got sufficiently more curious, and so I took a random constituency in Madhya Pradesh. It was called Guna. I calculated its probability. I found out that the
In
average
short, he was hanging out with the right crowd.
No, what happened was that I found out that the average voter in Tamil Nadu is about 40.
She's a kid.
Yeah. She is interested in this, right? And she should be. So eventually, moral of the story is that I found out that the average voter in Tamil Nadu is 40% more powerful in terms of electing their representatives compared to the voter in Madhya Pradesh. And I was wondering why. The answer to that is this book.
Good, well.
And if I may add, if you have a
One more
open and inquisitive mind,
Well done.
you can move from being an engineer to being a data scientist, to being a novelist, an anthropologist, historian. So what I want to tell students is keep your minds open, be inquisitive. Don't get bracketed and imprisoned in straitjackets.
One last question left. Is anybody I want to ask one? Not really. All right. Okay, we're done. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
What a fun.